I've only read the Quran once and it was in English.
Yeah.
Was it not the case that Muhammad had said honour the books that came before it? Is that not the case?
No. Islam, in terms of biblical history, if you're talking about, no, not at all. You know, gaslighting.
What am I thinking of then?
You're thinking of maybe a top level reading without getting into the specific details. Details matter. I'll give you a simple example. You might have come across
I just lost you all your crowd. I'm sorry.
No problem.
I don't know how this works. I've never been before.
No problem. For example, in the Quran, there are names used which are similar to biblical characters' names, like Nuh. They give you an impression that Nuh corresponds to Noah of the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, of course, in relation to Noah, the Bible, you have a worldwide flood.
Yeah.
And the Quran speaks about a worldwide flood in relation to Nuh. So you may think it's similar story. In reality, it isn't. For example, I'll give you a simple detail. According to the Bible, nowhere will you find God of the Bible destroying people just because they rejected Him. Nowhere will you find it. You know, of course, the Bible records multiple judgments. Sodom, Gomorrah, all of the world during the time of Noah. And many similar, Amalekites and so on. Many judgments are recorded in the Bible. Curiously, none of them, all of them were judgments where if we had lived there, we should have done the same thing. It's like if I see people who are killing their children, I will go and stop them and do everything to judge them. That's what God did. Never once did God destroy someone because they rejected Him. In the Bible, you won't see that.
This is true.
Yeah. In the Bible, you will only see that judgment. When you reject God, judgment corresponding to that is going to come only in the future. Your life in this world isn't cut short because of that. Only criminality in this world will cut short your life.
Of course.
In this world.
There's no specific time for that either, is there? It's just to be decided.
To be in the future. You have all the time until then. God is very gracious. God of the Bible is very gracious. In contrast, the Islamic Allah, every time, Nuh, Ibrahim, all these characters, there are judgments involved, lot. Everywhere the judgment is because the Islamic Allah is rejected. That was the only reason. Not for any other moral reason. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's a different quote-unquote God. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In other words, superficially, they may appear similar, but when you dig in a little bit deeper, you will realize every single thing that is in the Quran, which resembles the Bible in some way, shape or form, actually gaslights and replaces.
What is gaslighting?
Essentially,
there's multiple different variants of this.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be sure what your
Essentially, gaslighting is the psychological. What I have in mind is the psychological manipulation, which alters reality. Let's say your name. Let's say is Steve. I don't know what your name is. What is your name?
It's Rob.
Is what?
Rob.
So your name is Rob, and you know your name is Rob.
Yeah.
No, of course. In this case, let's say you're not lying or whatever. You're truthfully saying that your name is Rob. You're not giving a pseudonym for any reason.
Yeah.
So your name is Rob. But can you imagine if I come to you and say, no, Rob, you think your name is Rob, you're really not Rob, you're Steve. I have evidence for the fact that you are actually Steve.
It's delusion under effort, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's delusional, number one, on my part. But if I take efforts to make you, let's say I give you details, but do you remember 10 days ago, something happened somewhere, and I give you detail after detail after detail, which appears a little bit relevant to you, but confuses you. In some situations, people could be genuinely confused.
Yeah.
And that sort of psychological manipulation, where I'm trying to alter your perception of reality away from what is really true to something else which is completely a myth, just so I get something in return, sort of stuff. That is gaslighting. I'm psychologically manipulating you. And this is what the Quran has done to the Bible. In relation to who are the in relation to the stewards of the Bible, who are the people of the nation of Israel and Christians, the people of the nation of Israel being the stewards of the Old Testament and Christians being the stewards of the New Testament, we are now bombarded, and many Christians give in because they haven't read the Bible properly. They give in, bombarded with the false notion that the Quran has true history when it replaces the history of the Bible.
In which way does it replace the history of the Bible? I'm curious about that.
Very simply, the stories of Noah, Nuh, Ibrahim, Lot, Ishaq, Yaqub, Jacob in the Quran are very different to the actual realities of the stories of Noah, Abraham, Lot in the Bible.
In what way?
In the way I gave you earlier, nowhere in the Bible would you have any of these characters rejoice in the fact of God of the Bible destroying people merely because they rejected him. That'll be silly. That'll be immoral in the sight of God. God of the Bible would not do it. He reserves that judgment only to the end. So, they're going and telling people...
Where can we find that?
Everywhere, in the Quran, everywhere.
Where can we find that in the Old Testament, the New Testament?
Where can we find what?
Where that he wouldn't come and demolish things and kill people for abandoning him, etc., etc.
You can read, I'll give you a simple example. If you read the book of Genesis, chapters, I can't remember exactly now, but something like 6 to 9, I think. 6 to 9, maybe 10. It gives you details of what happened during the time of Noah, for instance. But if you read carefully, you'll find out, of course, during Noah's time, there was a worldwide flood, according to the Bible. But the Bible gives a specific reason for the destruction. Sorry. And the specific reason, Rob, for the destruction of almost the entire world during the time of Noah, the Bible says was violence. The Bible says violence filled the earth. Human beings were violent with each other. You might be familiar with these people called Nephilims. Giants were born, and and violence filled the earth. And the Bible goes on to say how even animals became violent to each other. They became carnivorous when they were supposed to be purely herbivorous. So they were violent. And if can you imagine people beating each other up here, killing each other? In that situation, God will be required to judge, to ensure that those who did not want to kill others could at least survive. You see what I'm saying? So that was the reason at that time where God judged the entire world apart from Noah's family. Noah's family clearly weren't involved in violence. They didn't want to go around kill. But the others, the Bible says, was because of violence. Violence filled the earth. I think it is Genesis chapter 6, maybe give or take, mostly give a couple of chapters, 6 to 8 somewhere, you'll find this detail. Violence filled the earth. But come to the Quran, the reason why the flood was sent during the time of Nuh of the Quran is because of rejection of the Islamic Allah.
In what sense?
In the sense that people refused to become Muslims.
I see.
Nuh came and said, look, you all need to become Muslims. You need to get back to this one religion with this one Islamic Allah. And if you refuse, the Islamic Allah will kill you. And he killed. And Muhammad, essentially the Quranic idea is every messenger in the past came with that same message. Oh look, all of us need to return back to one Islamic Allah. If you don't return, we'll kill you. Islamic Allah will judge you and destroy you. That's the message, time and time again.
Do you mind if I ask you?
Sure.
Sorry, is this being filmed? I'm sorry.
Yes, yeah.
Fine. Where's it going to end up?
In Operation Stephen, I can give you in that operation.
Okay, fine. Yeah. Just wanted to ask you, and this is purely if you need to get back to other things. Can I ask you about the Kaaba?
About the Kaaba.
The Kaaba.
Yeah. What
is that? What is that about? I know nothing about that.
Very simply, the Kaaba is Kaaba is what is essentially to Jerusalem, the temple in Jerusalem.
Yes. I've been to Jerusalem.
Yeah. You know what? The Kaaba is to the temple of Jerusalem, similar to a fake Rolex watch would be to a true Rolex watch. You have a true Rolex watch.
Yeah.
Reputable. For whatever reason, I don't know about Rolex. I don't have enough money to buy a Rolex. But people buy that for a particular reason, thousands of pounds, whatever. They buy for some quality that they get from the watch. When you have money, you maybe 1,000, maybe 5,000 pounds, maybe 10,000 pounds, you buy. But clearly there are fake Rolex watches, which are not worth those thousands of pounds. But what do they want to do? Clearly they don't have that quality, and that's why they are fake. But maybe what is normally worth maybe 100 pounds,
Yeah.
they sell for 5,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Pretending to be something that is Rolex. That is Kaaba to the temple in Jerusalem. The temple in Jerusalem was a place where truly God of the universe dwelt. You know, the Solomon's temple.
Yeah.
God of the universe dwelt there. Now, clearly Islam came about as a desperado who was jealous about the biblical worldview, the biblical revelation.
Jealous in which way?
Jealous essentially that that the Arabs did not have that same influence, did not have that same favor. So it's essentially people who said, look, we don't have it, why can't we have it? So their equivalent of the temple in Jerusalem is Kaaba. So Jews go to the temple of Jerusalem because that's their chief point of worship, and Muslims want to go to this Kaaba. That's their chief point of worship. And in the temple of Jerusalem, of course, we were supposed to have what is called the Ark of the Covenant, the ark, the box where the very presence of God was, and in Kaaba, Kaaba, the square. Yeah, no, I'm fine. Kaaba is really Kaaba is the cube, which was meant to be the replacement of the box. So that's the story of Kaaba.
I see.
How did it come about? I'm actually in the process of writing 2 books. My second book would be on that. How did Islam really start? And I'll explain. It's an ongoing area of research. Because historically, what we do know today is that Mecca didn't even exist pre-Islam. What we do know is that Mecca didn't even exist pre-Islam.
Yeah.
It's known through solid history and archaeology. But Muslims would like to think that Mecca and Kaaba were there since the time of Adam. So anyway, how did it come about is a recent area of research, because clearly the area has been opened up to Western scholarship, non-Islamic scholarship. So we can now study and understand. Earlier, we didn't have availability of resources for us to come to some sort of thesis on how Kaaba came about. But now there is plenty of information that's available to us also. So people are now studying in the last few decades. It's an ongoing area of research. Lovely, yeah. So, Rob, you're a Christian yourself?
Yes.
You are, praise. That's lovely.
It's interesting because I've heard some things about the Kaaba and what it was supposedly pagan in my eyes, from what history has pointed out to me. That's why I wanted to answer your question, because history is important to me.
Yeah.
History should be important to everybody, I think. Just want to know where it came from and what it was all about. And because obviously it was pre-Islam, as we've just said. There's things like the Black Stone, which I do not understand. But,
clearly it seems to have a complex history. There clearly were Kaabas, these black boxes, multiple in the Arabian Peninsula, but none in Mecca of today. So when did Kaaba when I referred to Kaaba earlier, I was purely talking about Kaaba in Mecca. Clearly the other Kaabas have been destroyed since.
Sorry, just to cut you in there, what is the name of the procession around the Kaaba? The pilgrimage, if you will, around the Kaaba. What's the name of that?
Today, Hajj.
Hajj,
yeah. They go. That's a travel, going there and going around the Kaaba and kissing the stone.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem at all. So it's a deep area. This is a deep area of study. It's an ongoing area of research. People are postulating multiple things. I mean, let's put it this way. Until 50 years ago, we were given an impression that Islamic history is rock solid. That's the impression we got. By we, I mean Western scholarship, Western world. We were given an impression, but we could do nothing about the impression. We could only listen and say, okay, because we didn't have resources at our disposal. We didn't have, manuscripts that we were studying in detail, or archaeological sites that were studied in detail and so on. So we just could say, okay, that's until 50 years ago. In the last 50 years, what has happened so far in the last 50 years, significantly, some couple of handful of Western scholars have demonstrated that clearly what is given as Islamic history is wrong. That much we know for sure. What is given as Islamic history, the Mecca, Medina, Hijrah and so on, this is the Islamic storyline. It's wrong. It doesn't hold water. That we have established now in the last 50 years.
That's within the last 50 years?
Just in the last 50 years.
Why is that, if I can ask?
Why only in the last 50 years?
Yeah.
Because only in the last 50 years, non-Islamic scholars were involved. So far they had Islamic scholars.
So there was a traditional...
Yeah,
it's
Islamic
a traditional
scholarship
faith,
wasn't
isn't it?
really scholarship. It was just Islamic propagandaship, if I could say. It's just, whatever they heard, they propagated. They didn't scrutinize critically.
Right.
So it wasn't scholarship in that sense of how we scrutinize before we accept something or propagate something. And so everyone just assumed it was true, and they religiously conveyed it to others. But in the last 50 years, this area of research has been available to Western scholars, non-Muslim scholars. For example, I can give you, there is a French scholar today a gentleman called Francois Desroches. The French Francois, F-R-A-N-C-O-I-S. Francois Desroches. French scholar. He has, he is the chief custodian who, on behalf of the university, but he is the chief guy, who manages one of the earliest manuscripts of the Quran. It is at his disposal. One of the earliest. So clearly, he is an authority now on the Quran, because one of the earliest manuscripts of the Quran he has. Likewise, one of the earliest fragments of the Quran is now in Birmingham, for example. In Birmingham. So we clearly today have access to resources in the Western world. Even the Islamic world has been a little bit opened up to critical scholarship by Westerners, which means we have been studying, which means we can critically analyze true scholarship, and we have been able to establish, no, this is all a lie. Your story is a lie. That much we have done so far. Now we need to find out what really happened. We know what they said happened, did not happen. That we know. So what really did happen is the question which people are now actively researching. And one or two, maybe three or four have postulated some things, but in my mind they don't bring together all available evidence. Now, there's a gentleman called Fred Donner who has his own postulate as to how Islam began, but it doesn't bring together all of the available artifacts.
In what way?
I'll give you a simple example. Some of the earliest of Islamic coins that we have access to today, some of the earliest of coins from the Islamic world, and I'm talking about 50, 60 years after Muhammad, supposedly. Some of the earliest after his death, from the Islamic Empire, the caliphs, the caliphate. You hear of the name caliphate? From the Islamic Caliphate, the first Islamic Caliphate, or rather this one is the second one. Some of the earliest coins we have access to appear to be Christian. They have a cross in it. They have features which are very similar to Byzantine coins, where Byzantine Empire is meant to be some sort of a Christian-related empire in the East. Yeah. And they share features. Even the face of the caliph is engraved. So you have things like this, which clearly can't happen in an Islamic world according to today's Islam. You can't have the face of your caliph engraved. You can't have the cross engraved. In your Islamic world,
What is the reason for that, if you don't mind me asking?
that's
understood that.
Very simply, it means Islam as it is postulated today clearly wasn't the Islam of that time. Something else had happened, and what had happened was lost in time. Now we have to uncover it again. What really happened in the first couple of centuries of Islam is an area of deep research, and that will help us understand why was Mecca set up Because Mecca didn't exist pre-Islam.
Yeah.
So why was it set up? Why was Kaaba set up? When was it set up? By who was it set up?
And
You know,
why?
all these questions are questions that need to be answered with evidence. So far, a couple of people have been trying to give some theses, but they're not bringing together all available artifacts, all available historical resources, including the Quran. I genuinely think even the Quran disagrees with traditional Islam. The Quran itself disagrees with almost the entirety of the traditional Islamic narrative.
That's interesting to know.
And that is the second book I'm working on. The second book is very simply the Quran, the original Mein Kampf. This began as the original Mein Kampf
Right.
and had nothing to do with Mecca, nothing to do
In
with...
what way Mein Kampf?
Very,
Very interesting way.
very simply, it began as a genocidal movement against the Jews and who were clearly Jewish Christians, either Jewish Christians or Christians who simply the Muslims couldn't distinguish from ethnic Jews. So in the entire Quran, Christians and Jews are treated almost similar because the Muslims didn't know the difference. And by Jews, I mean people who clearly weren't Christians but were ethnic Jews. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Of course, there were plenty of Christians who were also Jews ethnically.
Yeah, of course.
So the Quran didn't know much of their differences, and so the Quran puts them together as one lot and treats them in one way, apart from in some minor details. And so this is how Islam began, and this is the subject matter of my second book, the original Mein Kampf, to wipe these Jewish Christians and Jews and non-Jewish Christians was the very intent and central motivation of the Quran. It didn't begin as a new religion, it began as a religion, and I'll give some specific details in the book. It began as a sort of follow-up to the Bible in a particular way. But more of that in the book. Rob, lovely speaking to you.
Lovely to speak to you.
God's blessings.
I'll